Have you ever wondered what would happen if a town decided to erase time itself? Not by smashing clocks or breaking calendars, but by pretending one specific hour didn't exist? My hometown did exactly that. It buried midnight. I hadn't been back to Willow's Edge in nearly 12 years. I left as soon as I was old enough to drive, telling myself I'd never return, not even for a funeral. But life has a way of pulling you back to the places you swore you'd escape, and when my uncle passed away, I found myself driving along that old cracked highway that wound through the pines and led into the heart of the town I'd tried to forget. The first thing I noticed was how little had changed. The faded sign on the outskirts still leaned slightly to the left, its peeling paint declaring, "Welcome to Willow's Edge, where time moves slow." The slogan had always made me uneasy as a kid. Back then, it felt like a joke the adults were in on, one they'd never explain. Now, as I passed the sign at dusk, the words felt heavier, as if they'd been waiting for me all these years. Driving through Main Street was like moving through a memory, same hardware store with its flickering neon sign, same diner with the hand-painted mural of a rising sun. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, sharp and familiar. But what unsettled me most wasn't what I saw. It was what I didn't. Not a single clock anywhere. No neon clocks in the diner, no digital ones glowing through shop windows, not even the old tower clock in the square. Its face had been removed, leaving only a hollow circle where time should have been. At the funeral, I kept catching people staring at me in the way folks do when they recognize you but aren't sure if they should say anything. They whispered my name, Eli, and smiled politely, but there was something rehearsed about it, like they were all reading from the same script. My aunt, gaunt and pale, hugged me tighter than expected and whispered in my ear, "You shouldn't have come back. Not after dark." That night, I stayed in my uncle's old house on the edge of town, surrounded by boxes of his belongings. The place smelled of cedar and mothballs. I wandered through the rooms, letting nostalgia bleed into dread. Every clock I found, on the wall, on nightstands, even the microwave, had been altered. They all stopped at 11:59. Not broken, not frozen, but carefully, deliberately set. When I asked my aunt about it over tea, she gave me a tired smile. "We go to bed early here, Eli. Midnight isn't for us." She wouldn't explain further. No one would. When I pressed, they just shook their heads and changed the subject. Later, unable to sleep, I stood at the window, watching the street. The town was eerily quiet. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of something holding its breath. Every house sat dark, blinds drawn, as though the entire town had gone into hiding. My phone read 11:58. I waited. The seconds ticked. 11:59. And then, nothing. The minute never turned. The numbers didn't roll over. My phone froze, just like the clocks in the house. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against my skin, humming faintly like a deep vibration under the floorboards. That was when I saw movement at the end of the street. Shadows, long and crooked, slithering across the pavement though there was no light to cast them. Shapes that walked like people but bent at impossible angles, jerking forward in stutters, as though reality itself was skipping frames. The shadows paused, their heads, or what passed for heads, turning toward my window. I felt their attention like cold fingers pressing against the glass. My heart pounded, breath shallow, but I couldn't look away. And then, from downstairs, the grandfather clock I had sworn was broken began to chime. Once. Twice. 12 times. The sound echoed through the house like a dirge, and outside, the shadows began to move closer. The chimes rattled through the house like a death knell, each note stretching too long, vibrating inside my bones. By the time the 12th strike faded, I was gripping the windowsill so tightly my knuckles were white. Outside, the crooked figures had stopped moving. They stood in the middle of the street, facing my uncle's house, their shapes wavering like smoke rising from asphalt on a summer day. I couldn't make out their faces, if they had faces, but I felt their eyes, cold and wet, crawling across my skin. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, the silence in the aftermath of the chimes somehow louder than the sound itself. The house groaned softly, the wood settling, or maybe something else shifting inside the walls. My phone still read 11:59, its screen unresponsive no matter how many times I tapped. That was when I heard it, the soft creak of the front door. I froze. I hadn't unlocked it. I hadn't even gone near it. Yet from upstairs, I could hear the unmistakable sound of hinges complaining as the door inched open. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to crawl under the bed and pretend nothing was happening, but curiosity and terror are two sides of the same coin, and mine was already spinning in the air. I crept down the staircase, each step groaning under my weight, careful not to breathe too loud. At the bottom, I peered around the corner. The door stood wide open. Beyond it, the street was empty. The shadows were gone. But there was someone standing in the doorway. It was a man, dressed in clothes at least 30 years out of style, high-waisted trousers, a pale button-down shirt with suspenders. His skin was ashen, his smile stretched too wide, revealing teeth too sharp. He tipped his hat at me, though his head moved a fraction of a second after the gesture, as though his body hadn't gotten the timing right. "Evening, Eli," he said, his voice thin and layered, like multiple whispers woven together. "Welcome home." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a rug. Who the hell are you?" The man chuckled softly, though his face didn't change. "You don't remember me. But I remember you. They all do. Midnight remembers." I wanted to slam the door shut, but my hand wouldn't move. The man leaned in slightly, peering at me with those two bright eyes. "It's been a long time since someone stayed awake, Eli. You should be proud. Few are brave enough to see us anymore." His words made my stomach twist. See us anymore. I thought about my aunt's warning, about the missing clocks, about the way the whole town hid behind drawn blinds like children afraid of monsters. Except the monsters weren't imaginary, they were punctual. The man stepped forward, and for a moment, I thought he was coming inside. But instead, he leaned close enough that his cold breath brushed my ear. "Run along now. Pretend you didn't see. Pretend you didn't hear. Bury your head in your pillow like everyone else, and maybe, we'll forget you." I finally found the strength to slam the door shut, hard enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. I twisted the deadbolt, then pressed my back against the door, breathing hard, trying to convince myself I was still awake. The house stayed quiet for a long while. No footsteps. No voices. Just the faint hum in the walls and my own ragged breathing. Eventually, against every ounce of reason, exhaustion pulled me under, and I collapsed on the couch. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows. The clocks were all moving again. My phone read 7:32 a.m. Everything looked normal, almost too normal, as though the night had been a dream I was desperate to forget. Except when I stepped outside, the neighbors were waiting. Men and women stood in their yards, stiff and silent, all eyes on me. Not a word was spoken. Just 100 stares pinning me where I stood. Finally, Mrs. Langford, the sweet old woman who used to bake me cookies when I was a kid, shook her head slowly and whispered loud enough for me to hear. "You shouldn't have seen them, Eli. You shouldn't have stayed awake." The silence of the neighborhood pressed in on me, suffocating in its weight. Dozens of eyes, old and young, watched me without blinking. It wasn't angry curiosity, it was something worse. Resignation. As if they'd already decided my fate. Mrs. Langford's whisper still hung in the morning air like smoke. "You shouldn't have seen them." I cleared my throat, forcing my voice into the heavy quiet. "What's going on here? Where are you all hiding?" For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a man I didn't recognize, middle-aged, square shoulders, gray hair slicked back, stepped forward from the crowd. He wore a sheriff's badge pinned crookedly to his chest. His face was weathered, eyes bloodshot, but he carried himself with the authority of someone who didn't need to shout to be obeyed. "You broke the rule," he said simply. "And in this town, rules are the only thing keeping us alive." A ripple of uneasy murmurs passed through the gathered neighbors. Some nodded solemnly, others looked away, unwilling to meet my eyes. My skin prickled with unease. "What rule?" I snapped. "You mean the one about going to bed early like good little children? What the hell did I see last night? Who was that man?" The sheriff's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. "Not a man," he muttered. "Don't you dare call them that." Something cold slid down my spine. "Then what are they?" He glanced around at the neighbors, as if to gauge their readiness. Finally, he exhaled through his nose, voice low but clear. "They're midnight. The reason Willow's Edge still stands." Before I could ask what that meant, Mrs. Langford shuffled forward, her fragile frame trembling as she spoke. "We don't speak their names. We don't call to them. We don't look when the clocks stop. That's how it's always been. That's how we keep them satisfied." I felt my stomach drop. Satisfied. Like some kind of offering. The sheriff stepped closer, his shadow falling across me. "You stayed awake, Eli. You saw them. And now they'll remember you." The way he said it made my blood run cold. The crowd began to disperse after that, muttering to themselves, throwing me quick glances like I was already a condemned man. Within minutes, the street was empty again, leaving me standing alone in the morning light, rattled and confused. I spent most of that day wandering my uncle's house, trying to make sense of everything. His belongings, stacked neatly in boxes, felt like breadcrumbs left behind for me. Old journals, receipts, scraps of paper with times scrawled across them, always stopping at 11:59. It was as if he'd been obsessively cataloging proof of the same pattern the whole town was trying to erase. Late in the afternoon, I found a leather-bound notebook hidden beneath the false bottom of his desk drawer. My hands trembled as I flipped it open. Inside, the handwriting was frantic, erratic, nothing like the careful script I remembered from birthday cards. They came again. I heard them breathing through the walls. I thought they'd forgotten me, but they never forget. Midnight always collects. If you see them, don't run. Don't scream. Don't acknowledge. Pretend you're asleep, and maybe they'll pass you by. The final entry was smeared with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. "It's my turn tonight. Better me than him." They don't stop. They never stop. I sat back in the chair, heart thundering, the words burning themselves into my mind. Better me than him. Who was him? Did my uncle give himself up so someone else could survive? That evening, as the sky darkened and the town once again fell into its rehearsed silence, I paced the floor of the living room, gripping the notebook like a lifeline. Every instinct told me to leave, to get into my car and never look back, but something heavier kept me rooted. I had to know. I had to understand what this town had been hiding, and why everyone seemed willing to play along. The clocks ticked toward the inevitable. 11:57, 11:58. 11:59. The hum began, low and deep, vibrating through the walls like the house itself was holding its breath. And this time, when the front door creaked open by itself, I didn't hide. I stood in the hallway, staring as the shadows lengthened across the floorboards. Something stepped inside. The air inside the house grew heavier the moment the door creaked open. It wasn't a draft, wasn't the settling of old wood. It was a deliberate shift, like the house itself exhaled after holding something back all day. The hum that always preceded the strike of midnight vibrated in the walls, in the floorboards, even in my teeth. I couldn't move. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs felt nailed to the floor. And then, something stepped inside. The figure didn't move like a person. It was tall, too tall, its shoulders grazing the top of the doorway as it entered. Shadows clung to it like a second skin, obscuring its form, but I saw the outlines of long arms that reached too far, bending wrong at the elbows. Its head tilted as if listening, though I heard no breath, no sound from it at all. The silence it carried was worse than any scream. I stood in the hallway, frozen, the leather-bound notebook clutched to my chest. The creature's head jerked suddenly in my direction, and for the first time, I felt its attention, cold, piercing, suffocating. My uncle's words burned in my memory: don't run. Don't scream. Don't acknowledge. Pretend you're asleep. I forced my body into motion, staggering backward into the living room. The thing glided, yes, glided, closer, its movements smooth yet impossibly fast, like it existed between the seconds. I collapsed onto the couch, squeezing my eyes shut, slowing my breath, pretending with every ounce of desperation that I was asleep. The hum in the walls grew louder. My ears rang with the pressure, the sound thrumming against my ribs. I felt the floor dip as the creature drew near, its weight, or maybe its absence of weight, distorting everything around it. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. And then, I felt it. A hand, if you could call it that, hovered above my face. The air turned to ice, sinking deep into my skin. I had to fight every instinct not to shudder. My body screamed for release, for escape, but I kept still, praying that whatever midnight was, it would lose interest. Minutes dragged like hours. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would give me away. Finally, slowly, the hand withdrew. I heard the faintest whisper, not in words but in vibrations, a language that wasn't meant for human ears. The front door creaked open again. And just as suddenly as it had arrived, the thing was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. I didn't move until the clocks clicked over to 12:01, the hum vanishing as if sucked back into the walls. Only then did I gasp for air, my lungs burning from the effort of holding it in. My hands shook violently as I opened the notebook again, desperate for answers. The last entry replayed in my head: better me than him. The question gnawed at me: who was him? I didn't have to wonder for long. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the sound of a knock. 3 sharp raps on the door. When I opened it, the sheriff stood there, his eyes bloodshot, his badge dull in the early light. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, voice rough with exhaustion. I hesitated, but lying seemed pointless. "Yes. And I did what my uncle wrote." I pretended to sleep. The sheriff studied me with a look I couldn't decipher, relief mixed with something darker. "That's why you're still breathing." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "But don't think you're safe. Once they've noticed you, they don't forget. You're marked now." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling deep in my chest. "What are they?" I asked. "What do they want?" The sheriff's lips pressed into a thin line. "They want time. Midnight is theirs. Always has been. We give it to them, every night. That's the deal. You stay asleep, you survive. Break that, and you'll learn why we bricked up midnight in the first place." He turned to leave, but I grabbed his arm. My uncle, he knew. He wrote about them. He said it was his turn. What did he mean? The sheriff pulled free, his gaze avoiding mine. "Your uncle broke the rule too many times. He couldn't keep pretending. Midnight doesn't tolerate liars." He paused, voice softening in a way that made my stomach turn. "And if you're smart, Eli, you'll leave before it's your turn too." He left me standing there, the weight of dread sinking deeper than ever. The whole town had built its life around avoiding the truth, pretending that 12 o'clock never came. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. Midnight wasn't just some superstition, it was real, it was hungry, and it knew me now. That night, as 11:59 ticked closer again, I sat awake in the dark, staring at the shadows stretching across the walls. My uncle had given himself up, for me. Which meant midnight wouldn't rest until it collected what it was owed. The rest of that day passed in a fog. I walked through town as if the streets themselves were watching me, every cracked sidewalk and weathered porch concealing something alive. The neighbors smiled as they always did, polite and distant, but I noticed something I hadn't before. None of them met my eyes for long. It was as if they already knew what had happened the night before, as if the mark of midnight glowed on my skin for everyone to see. I returned to my uncle's house with the notebook still clutched in my hands. I must have read the entries a dozen times, my eyes tracing the frantic handwriting that grew messier toward the end, like his thoughts were racing too fast to contain. Better me than him. Again and again, that line burned through my mind. He had known this thing was coming for me. And he had stepped into the fire to keep it at bay. But the sheriff's words rattled me just as much. You're marked now. It meant no matter how quiet I stayed, no matter how much I pretended, midnight would always be watching. Waiting. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the single clock on the wall. Its ticking had never sounded louder, each second dragging me toward the inevitable. My chest tightened as the memory of the creature's hand lingered above my face, replayed in my head. If it had wanted me then, it could have taken me. So why hadn't it? I flipped open the notebook again, searching for anything I had missed. Near the back, I found a page that looked different. The ink was darker, smudged as though written under duress, the lines barely legible. They feed on the hour no one claims. The hour belongs to them because we gave it away. One town, one secret, for survival. But every bargain needs blood. Every debt needs paying. I gave my hour for him. It won't last forever. My throat went dry. I pressed the page flat against the table, my hand trembling. My uncle hadn't just been a victim, he had been a shield, standing between me and midnight until he couldn't anymore. And now the debt had rolled forward to me. That realization struck like a hammer. The town had made a pact long before I was born, and I had inherited it like a curse. My parents must have known, my uncle had definitely known, and now I was realizing too late. That was why no one stayed awake past 11:59. That was why every house sealed themselves into ritual silence. The town wasn't protecting itself from midnight, it was feeding it. I couldn't take the waiting anymore. I needed answers, and the only person who might still give them was the sheriff. I found him sitting in his truck outside the diner, nursing a cup of coffee like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. His eyes flicked up when I approached, and he sighed, setting the cup down. "You should have left already," he said, his voice carrying more fatigue than anger. "I can't," I told him, my voice sharper than I intended. "My uncle gave himself up for me. I can't just run. I need to know what's really happening here." The sheriff leaned back in his seat, studying me. For a long moment, I thought he might ignore me entirely. Then he rubbed his face with both hands, as if bracing himself, and muttered, "You sound just like him." "Then tell me what he knew," I pressed. "Tell me why this town acts like midnight doesn't exist." The sheriff's jaw tightened. He glanced around as though the walls themselves might be listening, then lowered his voice. "Midnight isn't just an hour. It's a door. A crack in the world. Something lives on the other side, something that was never meant to walk here. Long ago, when this town was founded, they made a choice. They sealed that door by pretending it didn't exist. 1 hour vanished. No midnight, no entry. But there's a cost to keeping the door closed. Every so often, it chooses someone. And when it does, the rest of us get to live another day." The words sank into me like stones. My stomach churned. "So what you're saying is, my uncle was chosen. And now, it's me?" The sheriff didn't answer, but his silence said enough. His gaze softened with something like pity, and for the first time, I saw the weight he carried in his lined face. "It's not fair," he admitted quietly. "It never was. But it's how we've survived." Anger welled up in me, hot and unsteady. "Survival? You mean sacrifice? You mean letting midnight take whoever it wants, while the rest of you hide and pretend?" His eyes hardened, though not with malice, more with resignation. "And what would you do different, son? Open the door for everyone? Let the whole town vanish in one night?" I had no answer. Not yet. That night, back in my uncle's house, I couldn't sleep. The ticking clock mocked me, every second dragging me closer to the moment the world split open. At 11:58, I made a decision. I wouldn't lie in bed and pretend again. I wouldn't cower while the town let me be consumed. If midnight was going to take me, I wanted to see it coming. I wanted to understand what my uncle had faced when he gave himself up. At 11:59, I lit a single candle and sat in the center of the living room, notebook in hand, my heart pounding like a war drum. I whispered to myself, "I won't close my eyes tonight." And then the clock hit 12. The hum began, deep and resonant, but this time louder, stronger, angrier. The walls trembled as though the house itself was breathing, drawing in a breath that could smother me whole. Shadows rippled across the walls, lengthening into impossible shapes. The door creaked. Something was coming through. The door opened slowly, not with the sharp crack of wood against hinges but with the sound of something wet and heavy peeling away from itself. The air thickened at once, and the candle flame sputtered violently, bending toward the open frame as though pulled by some invisible tide. I gripped the notebook tighter, my knuckles whitening. My uncle's final entries ran through my mind like a mantra I didn't fully understand. Better me than him. Better me than him. And then it appeared. At first, it wasn't a shape so much as a distortion, like the way heat blurs the air above pavement in summer. The edges of the doorway seemed to ripple, bending inward, and from within, a darkness spilled out, not black, not shadow, but something thicker, a color that didn't belong in this world. My chest tightened as the hum rose into a low drone, rattling the walls, vibrating through my teeth. The candle extinguished, leaving only that suffocating blackness and the impression of something moving toward me. Eyes. Not human eyes, but orbs that seemed glassy and wet, too many to count. They blinked out of sync, opening and closing in rhythmic patterns, watching me from angles that defied reason. A shape pressed against the threshold, half inside and half not, its limbs unfolding like the roots of some colossal tree forced through narrow soil. I couldn't move. My body locked in place, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would draw the thing closer. But it didn't pounce. It didn't reach. It waited. A voice, if it could be called that, slid into the room. It didn't come through my ears, but from within my head, scraping against my thoughts. "You see me now." I wanted to scream, but my lips wouldn't part. My jaw ached with the effort. All I could manage was a shuddering inhale. "You are the hour," it continued, every word reverberating inside my skull, "the one your blood has bought and carried. The one promised." The notebook slipped from my hands and landed open on the floor. The pages rustled, though there was no breeze. And then, impossibly, the ink shifted. My uncle's scrawls rewrote themselves before my eyes, letters bleeding into new shapes until they formed words I had never seen. "It will speak. It will tempt. Do not answer." My pulse raced. I understood now, my uncle had prepared for this moment, had known exactly what the creature would try. And if he had resisted, then so could I. But the thing pressed closer, its many eyes glowing faintly, its voice sinking deeper into my head. "Your uncle traded his hour for you. Brave. Foolish. Do you want to know what became of him?" The hum in the walls deepened until the very floor trembled beneath me. The shadows thickened, twisting into shapes that resembled human figures, thin, gaunt, faces stretched in silent screams. My uncle's face flickered among them, mouth open, eyes wide, his expression frozen in endless terror. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood, forcing myself not to speak. The notebook had been clear. The figures swayed as if pulled by invisible strings, each one mouthing words I couldn't hear but could almost feel vibrating in my chest. My uncle's lips formed the words "run." But I stayed. The voice grew sharper, angrier. "Answer me." The shadows lashed against the walls. The house groaned like it was alive, beams creaking under invisible weight. "You are mine to claim." Something inside me snapped. My terror curdled into fury. "I'm not yours," I hissed, my voice breaking the silence against the warning scrawled in ink. The room exploded. The hum rose into a piercing wail, the figures shattered into dust, and the darkness surged forward like a tidal wave. I was thrown backward, my body slamming against the wall with bone-jarring force. The notebook burst into flames where it lay, its pages curling inward as if devoured from within. Through the chaos, I heard the thing laugh. Not a human laugh, something older, jagged, layered with voices that weren't meant to overlap. "Then you will learn." The walls rippled, melting into corridors I didn't recognize. The kitchen stretched into a hallway that shouldn't exist, the windows vanished, and the house became something else entirely, a shifting labyrinth breathing around me. The candle stub was gone. The clock was gone. Midnight had swallowed everything. And I was no longer in my uncle's home. The world around me had changed. The walls of the house no longer resembled the familiar Victorian rooms I had known. The kitchen stretched into a narrow corridor that twisted impossibly, leading into a hall of mirrors that reflected not my own image, but glimpses of other faces, people I didn't recognize, their expressions frozen in terror, eyes wide and lifeless. The floor beneath me felt unsteady, like walking on thick gelatin, and every step made the walls breathe, inhaling and exhaling with a rhythm that matched the hum of midnight. Panic clawed at me, but I forced myself to keep moving. Each hallway split into more hallways, doors appearing and disappearing as if the house were alive and deciding where I could go. I reached for the doorknobs, but most were cold and immovable. Others swung open into empty voids that made my stomach lurch, black spaces that seemed to extend forever, whispering my name in voices that weren't human. And then I heard it, a faint sobbing, echoing through the twisted corridors. It was quiet at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew steadily, mingling with the low hum of the house itself. I followed it cautiously, the air thick with the smell of old paper, dust, and something metallic, like blood. The sobbing led me to a room that looked like a nursery. Toys were scattered across the floor, each one coated in a thin layer of dust that shimmered unnaturally. A rocking horse moved back and forth on its own, creaking softly, while a mobile above the crib spun, casting shadows that danced like flames on the walls. And then I saw them. Children, dozens of them, sat in a circle on the floor, faces pale, eyes wide, glassy, unblinking. They weren't moving except for subtle, jerky motions, and their mouths opened slightly as if whispering words I couldn't hear. Each child looked familiar in some impossible way, as though they were fragments of memories I didn't possess. My heart sank. These were the ones midnight had claimed before me, trapped inside the house in suspended terror. I wanted to run, to escape before I became another one of them, but the floor beneath me shifted. The door I had entered through disappeared, replaced by a wall of writhing shadows that pulsed in time with the low hum. The children's heads turned slowly toward me in unison, their eyes unblinking, and I realized with a jolt that they knew I was here. They weren't just trapped, they were aware, and they were warning me. A voice, my uncle's voice, unmistakable but distorted, echoed through the room. "Eli, the way out isn't up or down. It's inside. You have to confront it." "Confront what?" I whispered to the empty air, my voice trembling. The hum surged, and from the shadows, something coalesced. It was larger than before, its limbs stretching and folding in impossible geometries. Eyes glimmered all over its form, reflecting fragments of the children's terrified faces. Its presence was a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Midnight had found me. "You broke the rule," it hissed, not with words, but a vibration inside my skull that made my teeth rattle. "You saw what you were not meant to see. Now you are mine." I remembered the notebook, the entries, my uncle's warnings. I had a choice. I could panic, surrender, and become another lost face in this labyrinth, or I could fight, not with strength, but with knowledge, with understanding of what midnight was and how it had claimed the town for generations. I forced my legs forward, moving toward the center of the nursery. The children's glassy eyes followed me, and I realized they weren't just watching, they were guiding me. The whispers I thought were incoherent suddenly formed words: "Do not fear. Look beyond the hour. Face it." The room began to twist violently. The ceiling rose and fell like lungs, the walls bending inward, and I felt myself being pulled toward the shadowy mass. I shut my eyes and focused on my uncle's final words: pretend, resist, endure. See it and survive. When I opened my eyes again, I saw a door, faint, almost translucent, glowing with a soft, silver light. It wasn't a door I had noticed before, and I knew instinctively that this was the path the children had been guiding me toward. As I stepped closer, the mass of midnight recoiled slightly, as if aware that its prey was no longer entirely helpless. The hum shifted, a low growl vibrating through the floor, and I felt the pull of countless eyes tracking my every movement. I reached for the doorknob, my hand shaking, my heart hammering. The children's whisper grew louder, more insistent: "Eli, step through. Face it. End the hour." And then the shadows lunged. The door glimmered like liquid silver beneath my trembling hand. I could feel the pull from the other side, a magnetic tug that whispered promises of revelation and horror. My pulse throbbed in my temples as I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of dust, candle wax, and something impossibly ancient that clung to the edges of the threshold. The children's unblinking eyes followed me, urging me forward, and in that moment, I understood: they weren't prisoners, they were guides. I stepped through. The world shifted instantly. The nursery, the hallways, the breathing walls, they vanished. I was suspended in a void of soft gray light, endless and undefined. It was quiet, but the silence was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like a physical weight. Shapes moved in the periphery, not quite solid, not quite shadows. I could sense them before I could see them, the presence of all the people midnight had claimed before me, their essences folded into this space. A voice, older than time, resonated through the void. "You have come at last, Eli. You see us now. You have stayed awake. You have endured." The sound didn't originate from a mouth, yet the words vibrated in every fiber of my being. I forced myself to speak, voice quivering. Who are you?" The answer came not in words but in visions. Shapes unfolded before me, like pages turning in a book written by some unseen hand. I saw the town's founders, kneeling before something in the darkness, offering their hours, their lives, in exchange for survival. I saw my uncle, standing in a candlelit room, writing in his notebook while the shadows waited patiently outside his door. And then I saw myself, marked before I had ever returned, a thread in the web of midnight's hunger. "We are the hour," the voice intoned. "We are what your town buried. We are what you hide from when you pretend that midnight never comes. Time is our essence, and we are fed by those who break the rules." I felt a cold realization settle over me. Midnight wasn't just a creature. It was a force, a living manifestation of the hour itself, claiming anyone who dared witness it. My uncle had bought time, yes, but only for as long as the town kept obeying the rules. Every parent, every neighbor, every obedient citizen was a link in the chain holding midnight at bay. "Why me?" I asked, my voice echoing into the void. Because you saw us, the voice said. Because you disobeyed. Because now you must understand. The gray void began to pulse and twist. Shadows coalesced into forms that resembled people I had known, neighbors, family members, strangers from the streets of Willow's Edge. They reached out, their faces serene and terrifying at once, their glassy eyes reflecting my own terror. And then I understood. Midnight didn't just consume time. It consumed memory. Every person it claimed vanished from existence entirely. Records erased, photographs changed, names forgotten. That's why the town acted as though midnight never existed, their lives depended on denying the truth. And once a person broke that denial, midnight didn't just come for them, it made them remember everything they had lost, everything it had taken. A figure detached from the shadows. Taller than the others, with limbs bending at impossible angles and eyes scattered across its head and chest, it fixed its gaze on me. Your uncle chose for you, and yet you have chosen for yourself. Will you run, or will you endure? I swallowed hard, gripping my uncle's notebook in my mind as a lifeline. I endure, I whispered, though my teeth chattered. The shadows surged forward, pressing against me, and the void thickened into a suffocating mass. But instead of consuming me, I felt clarity. My fear didn't vanish, but understanding cut through it like a blade. Midnight wasn't inherently evil, it was inevitable. It was the truth of the hour, the reckoning no one in the town dared face. My uncle had endured it so I could survive, and now survival meant confronting it without flinching. The shadows retracted slightly, forming a path. The voice resonated, come now, then see it fully. Learn. And when you return, carry the knowledge. Only then can the town survive. Images unfolded, windows that should have existed but didn't, clocks that stopped forever at 11:59, houses with brick doors, parents pretending sleep could save their children, sacrifices made in silence, lives erased without memory. And finally, my uncle, smiling faintly at me, an acknowledgement that he had endured and that now it was my turn to understand. The pulse of the void slowed, and a doorway of silver light appeared, smaller this time, inviting me back. The children's whisper followed, return. Tell them. Break the silence. End the hour. With my heart hammering, I stepped toward the light, leaving the void behind, the weight of midnight's presence still lingering in my bones. As I crossed the threshold, I was back in the house, my uncle's house, but nothing felt normal. The walls were intact, the rooms familiar, but the clock on the wall ticked. For the first time, it ticked past 12 o'clock. Midnight had passed. And I realized, with a shiver of both relief and dread, that I had survived, but only just. I stepped out of the house just as the first stars blinked weakly in the evening sky. The air was unnaturally still, as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting. The streets were empty, or at least, they appeared empty, but I could feel them watching me. Every house I passed had its doors bricked from the inside, the windows dark and unwelcoming. It struck me anew just how vast the conspiracy of silence was. The sheriff's truck was gone, the diner closed, and even the streetlights seemed dimmer than before. It was as if the town was waiting for midnight to reclaim its own, to remind everyone that the hour was not theirs. I realized that my encounter in the void hadn't just been about survival, it had been a lesson. I had seen what midnight really was, what it had taken from generations, and what it demanded from those who dared witness it. I walked toward the town square, notebook clutched like a lifeline. The void hadn't given me many instructions, only that understanding was the first step. But understanding alone wouldn't be enough. The townsfolk depended on the illusion of normalcy, and now that I knew the truth, I was both a threat and a link in the chain. I spotted a group of neighbors gathered in hushed conversation. Their faces, calm and polite during daylight hours, now carried a tense edge. As I approached, the elderly woman who had first warned me years ago tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "You've seen it," she said softly, though the words carried the weight of inevitability. "I have," I replied, voice steady despite the tremor running through me. I know what midnight is. I've seen it. I know what it takes. A man stepped forward, tall, with a face that was familiar but not friendly. Then you also know the rules, he said. And you also know that breaking them can cost more than your life. It can cost the entire town. I swallowed hard. I'm not here to break them. I'm here to end the cycle. To make it so that no one else has to live in fear of the hour. The woman laughed softly, though it sounded hollow. End the cycle? Do you even understand what that would mean? Midnight is older than the town. Older than any of us. You can't end it. You can only endure it, or join those it has claimed. I felt the weight of the void's lesson press down on me, and a strange determination settled in my chest. I understand it better than anyone here. My uncle gave his hour so I could survive. And now I know that survival is not just hiding. It's facing it. I can't just pretend midnight doesn't exist anymore. Someone has to confront it, and I can't run. The townsfolk exchanged uneasy glances. Some looked afraid, others wary, but I could see a faint spark of recognition in their eyes. They understood that I had crossed a line, that knowing the truth changed everything. A low hum began to resonate, rising gradually from the depths of the town. I turned, sensing rather than seeing the hour approaching. The clock on the town hall chimed 11:59. Every second stretched painfully, and the shadows in the corners of the streets began to stir. The town had been holding its breath for centuries, and now that the hour was returning, it demanded attention. I walked to the center of the square, standing alone as the final seconds of the day ticked away. The hum swelled into a roar, and I felt the ground vibrate beneath my feet. Midnight had arrived, and it had recognized me. I could see the distortions in the air, the bending of reality, the ripple of shadows across the bricks and mortar. The void wasn't confined to the house anymore. It spread, brushing against the edges of consciousness, testing, probing. And then I remembered the children's whispers from the void, face it. End the hour. I drew a deep breath, steadying myself against the pulsing force that wanted to pull me in. I spoke aloud, for the first time to the town and perhaps to midnight itself. I see you. I understand you. I will not hide. The hum shifted, almost surprised, as if acknowledging that someone had finally resisted the instinct to flee. Shapes began to twist and fold in the square, shadows of those the town had sacrificed, faces frozen in time, their glassy eyes blinking for the first time since they had been claimed. I realized then that my uncle's act of endurance had not been futile. By confronting midnight, by seeing it and surviving it, I had begun to break its hold. But the force was not done. The air thickened, and the shadows swirled into something massive, towering above the rooftops. It whispered, a sound that was both everywhere and nowhere, you may survive. But survival comes at a cost. Will you pay it? I nodded, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on me. I will, I said. And then I stepped forward, into the darkness, ready to confront the entity that had haunted my town for centuries. The townsfolk watched silently, their faces pale but understanding. For the first time in decades, the town did not brick its doors, did not hide in fear. They stood with me, witnesses to the confrontation, yet powerless to intervene. As the clock struck 12, I felt the pull of midnight's full presence, a force that could crush mind and body alike. But instead of succumbing, I reached into the center of the void, into the essence of the hour itself, and anchored myself in the knowledge, in the clarity, in the understanding that I was no longer a victim but a participant. The shadows recoiled, twisted, and then, something shifted. The hum broke into silence, the distortion eased, and for the first time, the night felt still. Midnight had been confronted. Not defeated, but acknowledged, understood. And in that recognition, I felt a fragile hope, a promise that the town might finally live without fearing the hour, though the cost of knowledge would linger forever in my soul. The night was quiet after the confrontation, but the stillness carried a weight heavier than any sound. The townsfolk had returned to their homes, standing in doorways or leaning against walls, faces pale but resolute, as if they had witnessed something monumental without understanding it entirely. The streets were empty now, save for me, standing in the center of the town square, the hum of midnight reduced to a soft vibration beneath my feet. I felt a strange calm settle over me, yet the void's presence still lingered like a shadow across my mind. Midnight had receded but not vanished. Its power was eternal, a force bound to the hour, and I understood finally that confronting it had not been about defeating it, it had been about recognition. Survival was never about escaping, it was about endurance, understanding, and the willingness to bear witness. I turned to the town hall, the clock's hands frozen at 12. The enormous brass pendulum had stopped mid-swing, a symbol of the frozen hour that defined the town's existence. But now, something had changed. The pendulum slowly resumed its motion, a steady, deliberate swing, and I realized that the town's time, its reality, was no longer entirely under midnight's sway. For the first time in generations, the hour belonged to the living. Yet the truth hit me with a chilling clarity. My uncle's sacrifice had done more than protect me. It had transferred responsibility. All the generations before me had endured, yes, but they had never seen it fully, never comprehended the full weight of the entity they had fed. Now the knowledge was mine, and with it came a burden I could not share, a secret the town could not survive if fully revealed. A breeze stirred, carrying a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Eli, my uncle's voice, faint but unmistakable, floated in the air. You've seen it. You've endured. But now you must decide. I swallowed hard, heart hammering. Decide what? The shadows at the edges of my vision shifted, taking the shape of figures I recognized, the faces of those the town had lost, their eyes glassy, unblinking, watching me with an eerie patience. Do you accept the hour? The voice asked. Will you bear it, or will you deny it and let it claim the town again? The realization struck like lightning. The cycle had never truly ended. Every resident of the town had been complicit, not just in hiding midnight, but in containing it, in channeling its hunger to preserve their lives. My uncle had stepped into the void willingly, becoming the bridge that allowed the town to continue. And now, with knowledge in my hands, I was that bridge. I could turn away, hide, and risk the town succumbing entirely, or I could accept the hour and ensure that midnight's hunger was managed, channeled, understood. I felt a pull toward the square, toward the shadows that reached for me, and I realized with a shiver that my uncle's final warning had been literal, better me than him. The mantle had passed to me. I accept, I whispered, voice trembling but firm. I will bear the hour. I will endure. The shadows recoiled, folding inward, and a silence descended that was almost tangible. Then the town itself seemed to exhale, the streets settling, the walls breathing once, and the hum that had haunted every moment of my life here faded into a faint, distant vibration. But the final revelation struck me as the sun began to rise, painting the town in golden light. Midnight was not a creature, not a being, not a singular horror. It was a living measure of choice, of sacrifice, of humanity's willingness to endure the unknown. The townsfolk were not merely survivors, they were participants in a cycle that stretched back generations, one that required conscious acknowledgement, conscious participation, and conscious bravery. And the twist that made my blood run cold? I was not the first in my family to bear it. My uncle's endurance had been temporary, yes, but before him, someone else in my bloodline had faced the same hour. The town's protection had always been a carefully constructed illusion, and my family line had always been the linchpin. I had been chosen before I even arrived, destined to see, endure, and decide. I sank to the steps of the town hall, exhausted but aware, as the first townspeople emerged, cautiously stepping into the morning light. They looked at me differently now, not with fear, not with ignorance, but with recognition. The cycle had shifted, yes, but it would continue, always requiring someone to see, someone to endure, someone to bear the hour. I clutched the memory of my uncle, of the void, of the glassy-eyed children and the hum of the house, and for the first time, I understood the true price of awareness. Midnight would never be gone. It would always exist, always hunger, always demand acknowledgement. But now, at least, it would be guided. It would be endured. As the town returned to its fragile routines, I realized one final, chilling truth: surviving midnight was not the end. It was the beginning. The hour would come again, every night, in every heartbeat, in every shadow. And the knowledge, the responsibility, the burden, it was mine to bear forever. And somewhere, in the distance, I could still hear the faintest hum, a reminder that midnight had not vanished. It had simply been seen.